In August 2019, in Haskell County, Texas, 35-year-old Claire Mercer stood barefoot in the ash where her kitchen had been. Behind her, the last blackened fence post still smoked. In front of her, 64 acres of dry wheat stubble stretched toward a line of mesquite trees. The bank had called it a total loss. Claire called it something else. Her farm. She was a single mother with a 12-year-old son, $43,000 in farm debt, and less than $300 left in her checking account. Now the bank wanted the land. All 64 acres. And 3 days after the fire, a foreclosure notice appeared on her mailbox. Claire read it twice. Then she noticed something strange. The date on the notice was 2 days before the fire. She folded the paper and put it in her pocket. She did not call the bank. Not yet. The farm had belonged to Claire's grandfather, Amos Mercer, who had raised winter wheat, sorghum, and a few stubborn pecan trees on the property since the 1970s. Claire inherited it after her mother died, but inheritance had not erased the old operating loan. The loan had followed her like a shadow. 4 years, Claire worked before sunrise. She fed the chickens, packed her son's lunch, checked the irrigation pump, climbed onto her old Ford 8N, and spent the hottest part of every afternoon repairing whatever had broken that morning. The Ford had belonged to Amos. Its red paint was almost gone. The steering wheel was cracked. But the engine still started after 2 turns of the key. Claire trusted machines that had survived bad years. She had learned to distrust people who promised easy ones. That spring, the bank sent an agricultural loan officer named Daniel Voss. Voss was 52, clean-shaven, and always arrived in a pressed shirt that looked untouched by Texas dust. He studied Claire's fields through the window of his black pickup. 64 acres isn't enough anymore, he told her. Claire kept looking at the wheat. It was enough for my grandfather. That was a different economy. He offered her a restructuring plan. The interest rate would rise. The collateral requirement would rise. And the bank wanted her to sign a new agreement giving it authority over the entire property if she missed 2 payments. Claire refused. Voss smiled without warmth. Then you should consider selling. She looked at him. No. He left without answering. 6 weeks later, Claire's wheat failed. Not completely. That was the strange part. The western 40 acres were dry but healthy enough to survive. The eastern 24 acres were almost dead. Claire walked those rows every evening, rubbing the soil between her fingers. Something was wrong underground. The soil was darker near the old fence line. She dug with a hand trowel. At 12 inches, she found crushed limestone. At 18 inches, she found something else. A strip of black plastic. It ran straight beneath the field. Claire followed it for 30 yards before the sun disappeared. The next morning, she brought out the Ford 8N and an old 3-point blade. She dug carefully. Under the plastic was an abandoned drainage pipe. It was cracked, but water still moved through it. Claire crouched beside the opening. The water smelled faintly of diesel. She immediately stopped the tractor. Someone had been using that line recently. Her grandfather had never installed it. That night, Claire went through Amos's old records. Most were handwritten crop notes, seed receipts, and equipment repairs. At the bottom of a rusted filing cabinet, she found a county survey from 1978. The original property line was marked in red pencil. Claire placed the map over her current tax statement. The boundary was different. Not by a few feet. By nearly 11 acres. She checked again. Then she noticed a faded stamp at the bottom. Right-of-way adjustment. There was no signature from Amos. Claire slept badly that night. At 2:17 in the morning, her son woke her. "Mom." She heard him standing in the hallway. "What?" "There are headlights outside." Claire went to the window. A white pickup sat beyond the barn. Its lights were off. She watched it for nearly a minute. Then it drove away. The next morning, she found tire tracks beside the eastern field. The tracks led directly toward the buried drainage pipe. She followed them. Near the fence, something caught her eye. A small brass valve had been installed beneath the weeds. It was new. Claire touched it. Then she heard a truck engine behind her. Daniel Voss stepped out. He looked at the valve. For the first time since Claire had met him, he did not smile. "You shouldn't be digging around there," he said. Claire stood slowly. "Why?" Voss looked toward the eastern field. Then toward the road. "Because that land isn't worth what you think it is." Claire studied his face. "You've never told me what you think it's worth." He said nothing. Then his phone rang. He answered. His expression changed. "She's there." Claire heard only one side. Voss turned away. "Don't do anything until I get back." He hung up. Claire watched him climb into his truck. Before he drove away, he looked once more at the buried pipe. Then he said something so quietly that Claire almost missed it. They were supposed to burn everything. The truck disappeared down the county road. Claire remained beside the field. For several seconds, she couldn't move. Then she looked toward the farmhouse. The old porch. The barn. The 64 acres. And suddenly the fire made sense. Not all of it. Just enough to scare her. Because someone hadn't wanted her farm burned. Someone had wanted something underneath it. That evening, Claire returned to the burned farmhouse. She moved through the ruins with a flashlight, stepping around collapsed boards and broken glass. Near the kitchen wall, something metallic protruded from the ash. She pulled it free. It was Amos's old steel document box. The lock had melted. Claire opened it. Inside was one surviving envelope. Her grandfather's handwriting was still visible. Claire turned it over. There was a date. And beneath the date were 6 words. "Do not let the bank see this." She stared at the envelope. Then she heard a car stop outside. Someone was walking toward the ruins. And this time, Claire knew they had come looking for the same thing. Claire slipped the envelope beneath her jacket just as a flashlight moved across the broken kitchen wall. She killed her own flashlight. The ruins went dark. Footsteps crossed the porch. Slow. Careful. Whoever had come was not searching like a firefighter. They were searching like someone who already knew what they wanted. Claire crouched behind the remains of the pantry wall. A man entered the kitchen. She recognized his boots. Daniel Voss. He moved directly toward the steel box. Claire held her breath. Voss kicked through the ash, then stopped. The box was gone. He whispered something she couldn't hear. Then his phone rang. "She's not here," he said. Claire stared at him through the darkness. A second voice came through the phone. Voss turned toward the field. "Then move the equipment tonight." Claire's heart tightened. Equipment? What equipment? Voss left 10 minutes later. Claire waited until his truck disappeared before stepping outside. She opened the envelope beneath the moonlight. Inside was a single yellowed survey and a handwritten note from Amos. The first sentence made her stop breathing. "The bank does not own the land beneath the east fence." Claire read it again. The survey showed an old county drainage corridor running diagonally beneath the eastern 24 acres. But that wasn't the important part. At the bottom, Amos had written, "If they ever claim the whole farm, find the culvert." Claire folded the paper. She knew where the culvert was. Or thought she did. The next morning, she drove her Ford 8N to the eastern field. Her son, Eli, sat beside her holding the old survey. They followed the drainage line until the tractor wheels sank into soft ground. Claire shut off the engine. The field was silent. Then Eli pointed. "Mom." A patch of weeds moved beside the fence. Not from wind. Water was bubbling beneath them. Claire climbed down. She dug with a shovel. At 3 feet, she hit concrete. At 4 feet, she exposed the mouth of an old culvert. Cold water ran through it. Claire knelt beside the opening. The water was clean. Too clean. It was coming from somewhere beyond her property. Eli looked at the map. "Where does it go?" Claire traced the line with her finger. Straight beneath the eastern field. Then beneath the county road. Then toward an abandoned cotton gin nearly 2 miles away. Claire remembered something. The cotton gin had been demolished in 1986. But the underground water system remained. And according to Amos's notes, the county had promised to maintain it. Claire sat back on her heels. The fire had not destroyed the drainage system. It had exposed it. That afternoon, she called the county office. The clerk searched the records. "There was an easement here," she said. "When?" "1978. "Who owns it?" The clerk hesitated. "The county." Claire closed her eyes. "Not the bank." "No." That should have been good news. Instead, the clerk lowered her voice. "There's a problem." "What?" "The easement was removed from the current property map in 2004. Claire looked toward the burned farmhouse. "Who removed it?" The clerk was silent for several seconds. Then she said, "I think you need to come in." Claire arrived before closing. County Surveyor Harold Pike was waiting. He was 61, broad-shouldered, and known for laughing at farmers who brought handwritten maps into his office. He spread Claire's documents across his desk. At first, he looked amused. Then he stopped. He pulled out an older county plat. The lines matched. "Exactly. The original easement was never legally abandoned," Pike said. Claire leaned closer. "What does that mean?" "It means the bank may not have clean title to the eastern portion." Claire's pulse quickened. "How much?" Pike measured the survey. 24 acres. Claire stared at him. The bank was trying to foreclose on 64 acres. But 24 of those acres were tied to an old public drainage corridor. Pike looked uncomfortable. "That's not all." He opened another folder. Inside was a 2004 appraisal. Claire recognized the bank's name. The appraisal described her farm as 64 acres of dry agricultural land. But attached to the back was a handwritten notation. "Potential commercial water access." Claire looked up. Why would a farm appraisal mention commercial water? Pike didn't answer. Instead, he pointed to the map. A blue line continued beneath the eastern field toward the old cotton gin. "That water source," he said, "feeds a larger underground system." "How large?" Pike hesitated. "Large enough that someone has been trying to control it for years." Claire suddenly understood why Voss had been interested in the field. But she still didn't know why they burned the farmhouse. Then Pike found another document. A permit application from 6 months earlier. A private company had requested permission to build a commercial agricultural processing facility near the county road. The proposed access road crossed Claire's 64 acres. The company needed the land. Claire's face went cold. "Who owns the company?" Pike looked at the paperwork. "Mercer Agricultural Holdings." Claire stared at the name. "My grandfather's name?" "No." Pike shook his head. "Just similar." But Claire knew better. Amos had always warned her that people sometimes borrowed old family names because they sounded respectable. She took a photograph of the permit. Outside the county office, her phone rang. It was Voss. "Claire," he said, "we can still make this easy." She said nothing. "You sell the farm. Walk away with enough money to start over." "How much?" "70,000. Claire almost laughed. 64 acres. A water corridor. A commercial project. And they were offering her $70,000. "No." Voss's voice hardened. "Then you're going to lose everything." Claire looked across the road at the courthouse. "Maybe." She ended the call. That evening, rain began falling over Haskell County. It was the first serious rain in months. Claire returned to the field. The old culvert was roaring now. Water pushed through the concrete tunnel with enough force to shake loose stones from the bank. Claire watched the muddy stream disappear underground. Then something floated toward her. A black plastic document sleeve. She pulled it from the water. Inside was a copy of a bank survey. The paper was dated 3 days before the fire. Claire unfolded it. Someone had drawn a red line around the eastern 24 acres. Beside it was one handwritten word. "Acquire." Claire stood in the rain. For the first time, she understood what the bank had been trying to do. They weren't trying to collect a debt. They were trying to obtain the land. And the fire had been the fastest way to make a struggling farmer look desperate enough to surrender it. But there was one problem they had overlooked. Claire still had the original survey. And now she had something else. Proof that the bank had known about the easement before the fire. She drove home and placed every document into a plastic storage tub. Then she heard a knock. Harold Pike stood outside. His truck was covered in mud. He held a county file against his chest. "I found something you need to see." Claire opened the door wider. Pike stepped inside. He placed the file on the table. "I checked the 2004 records." Claire waited. The signature approving the easement removal wasn't from the county. Whose was it? Pike looked directly at her. Daniel Voss. Claire's fingers tightened around the edge of the table. Then Pike opened the final page. There was another signature beneath Voss's. Claire recognized it immediately. It belonged to the bank's regional president. And underneath both signatures was a date. The day before Amos died. Claire stared at the page. Her grandfather had known. He had been trying to protect the farm until the very end. But why had he never told her? Pike closed the folder. "Claire, there's something else." She looked up. "The foreclosure hearing is tomorrow morning." Claire's stomach dropped. "Tomorrow?" Pike nodded. "They're going to ask the judge for immediate possession." Claire looked at the documents scattered across her table. Then at the old steel box. Then toward the dark window where rain streaked the glass. She had one night to prove that the bank had not burned a worthless farm. They had burned the evidence surrounding something far more valuable. And Claire was about to walk into court carrying the one thing they thought the fire had destroyed. Claire did not sleep. At 4 in the morning, she spread every document across the kitchen table. The original 1978 survey. The 2004 easement map. The bank appraisal. The permit application. The plastic sleeve pulled from the culvert. And finally, Amos's handwritten note. She kept returning to the same question. Why had her grandfather written, "Do not let the bank see this"? At sunrise, Eli came downstairs. He found his mother standing beside the old Ford 8N, already dressed for court. "You going?" Claire nodded. "Are you scared?" She looked at him. "Yes." It was the first honest answer she had given anyone. Eli picked up the steel document box. "Then take Grandpa's box." Claire almost smiled. She loaded it into the truck. Before leaving, she walked once around the burned farmhouse. The blackened walls looked empty. But beneath the ash, something remained. The land. The water. And 64 acres that suddenly seemed to contain more history than Claire had ever understood. At 8:12 a.m., Claire entered the Haskell County Courthouse. The hallway was crowded. Bank attorneys. County officials. 2 men from the Agricultural Development Company. Neighbors who had heard about the fire. And Daniel Voss. He stood beside a polished attorney in a gray suit. When he saw Claire, his expression barely changed. The attorney whispered something. Voss nodded. Then he smiled. It was the same smile he had worn the day he first offered to buy her farm. Claire kept walking. Inside the courtroom, the bank's attorney presented the case first. Claire had defaulted. The property had been damaged. The loan was delinquent. The bank had a legal right to recover its collateral. Every statement sounded reasonable. That was what frightened Claire. The truth was buried beneath paperwork. The judge looked toward her. "Ms. Mercer, do you have counsel?" "No, Your Honor." The attorney smiled faintly. Claire placed the steel box on the table. "I have records." The judge nodded. "Proceed." The bank attorney stood. "Your Honor, this is a straightforward foreclosure matter." Claire looked down at the documents. Straightforward. That word stayed with her. Because nothing about the farm had been straightforward. Not the fire. Not the drainage pipe. Not the missing easement. Not the strange survey. And certainly not the bank's sudden interest in 64 acres of dry Texas ground. The attorney introduced the bank's appraisal. 64 acres of agricultural property with limited commercial value. Claire raised her hand. The judge allowed her to speak. "That appraisal isn't complete." The attorney turned. "Excuse me." Claire placed another document on the table. The original appraisal. The courtroom became quiet. The bank attorney picked it up. His eyes moved across the page, then stopped. Claire watched his face. He had found the handwritten notation. Potential commercial water access. The attorney looked toward Voss. Voss didn't move. Claire continued. The version submitted to the court removes that page. The judge leaned forward. Counsel. The attorney requested a recess. Claire refused to look at Voss. For the first time, he looked worried. Outside the courtroom, a woman approached Claire. She was 68, wearing a faded denim jacket. Claire recognized her. Mrs. Bell. Her grandfather's former neighbor. I knew Amos, the woman said. Claire nodded. Mrs. Bell reached into her purse. I should have brought this years ago. She handed Claire an envelope. Inside was an old photograph. Amos stood beside a county surveyor near the eastern field. Behind them was the original culvert. But that wasn't what made Claire's hands shake. A young Daniel Voss stood in the background. So did the bank's regional president. The photograph had been taken in 1981, years before the easement was supposedly removed. Mrs. Bell whispered, They came back after your grandfather died. Why? Because Amos wouldn't sell. Claire stared at the photograph. What were they after? Mrs. Bell looked toward the courtroom. Water. The word landed heavily. Not oil. Not minerals. Water. The old underground drainage corridor connected to an aquifer-fed irrigation system used by several farms downstream. During drought years, access to that water could determine whether entire fields survived. The commercial company wanted control of the corridor. The bank had discovered that Claire's debt made her vulnerable, and the fire had been intended to make surrender easier. But Claire still needed proof. Not suspicion. Proof. Back inside, the bank attorney returned. The judge ordered him to explain the missing appraisal page. He claimed it was irrelevant. Then Claire placed the plastic sleeve from the culvert on the table. Inside was the bank's own survey. The judge studied it. Where did you obtain this? From the drainage culvert beneath my property. The attorney stood. That document has not been authenticated. Claire expected the judge to dismiss it. Instead, Harold Pike entered the courtroom. He had brought the county records. I can authenticate it. The bank attorney's face changed. Pike explained the original easement. He explained the 2004 alteration. Then he produced the county archive copy. The judge compared the signatures. The courtroom fell silent. One signature belonged to Daniel Voss. The other belonged to the bank's regional president. The attorney tried to object. The judge raised one hand. Enough. Voss shifted in his chair. Claire looked at him. He no longer looked confident. But the judge wasn't finished. Mr. Voss, were you involved in the 2004 easement modification? Voss stood. His attorney immediately whispered to him. Voss said nothing. The judge repeated the question. Finally, Voss answered. I signed the document. Claire felt the room tilt. On whose authority? Voss looked toward the bank attorney. No answer. The judge's voice hardened. Mr. Voss. He swallowed. The bank's regional office. Why? Voss hesitated. Then he said something that changed everything. Because the property was expected to be developed. Claire stared at him. The judge asked, developed by whom? Voss remained silent. The attorney objected. But before the judge could rule, the courthouse doors opened. A county environmental inspector entered carrying a thick folder. He looked at Claire. Then at the judge. Your Honor, I believe you should see this before making any decision about the property. He opened the folder. Inside were photographs taken beneath the eastern field. The first showed the old culvert. The second showed a newer pipe connected to it. The third showed a valve system installed without a county permit. And the fourth photograph showed something Claire had never seen. A large underground concrete chamber. It had been built beneath her farm. The inspector pointed to it. That chamber is not on any county map. Claire stared at the photograph. "What's inside?" The inspector looked at the bank attorney, then back at Claire. "We don't know." The judge ordered an immediate inspection. That afternoon, county crews arrived at the farm. Claire followed them across the eastern field. The rain had softened the soil. A backhoe opened the ground. 3 feet. 4. 5. Then the bucket struck concrete. The workers stopped. They cleared the earth by hand. A rectangular chamber emerged beneath the field. Claire stood at its edge. The inspector climbed down. Seconds later, he called up. "Claire." She stepped closer. "There are pipes in here." "How many?" The inspector looked around. "More than anyone expected." Then he found a rusted metal plate bolted to the wall. He wiped away the dirt. Letters appeared. Claire read them aloud. Mercer Irrigation Cooperative. Her grandfather's name was beneath it, but the date was from 1969, before Claire was born, before the bank's current executives, before Voss, before the fire. Claire stared into the chamber. Her grandfather hadn't hidden a worthless drainage pipe. He had protected an entire water system, and someone had spent decades trying to make sure nobody remembered it existed. Then the inspector lifted one final object from the darkness. A sealed metal cylinder. It carried Amos Mercer's initials. Claire's hands began to tremble. She reached for it. The seal was still intact. And for the first time since the fire, she realized the bank might not have known everything her grandfather had left behind. She broke the seal. Inside was a document. Only 1 page. At the top were 7 words. "Water rights belong to the landowner forever." Claire read the next line, then stopped, because the final sentence named the person who would inherit those rights. It wasn't her. It was someone she had never heard of. The name at the bottom of Amos Mercer's document was Samuel Bell. Claire knew the name. Mrs. Bell's husband. He had died 11 years earlier. Mrs. Bell covered her mouth. "My husband," she whispered. The inspector nodded. The document explained that in 1969, Amos and Samuel had helped establish the Mercer Irrigation Cooperative. Farmers had built the underground system together, and the water corridor could never be sold separately from the farms using it. The bank had never owned the water. It had only financed the land. But Claire noticed something else. The document listed 64 acres. Not 24. All 64. Her entire farm had been included in the original cooperative agreement. She looked at Pike. Then why did the bank's records say otherwise? Pike didn't answer immediately. He turned the page over. There was another signature. Daniel Voss. Claire felt the air leave her lungs. Voss had not discovered the water system recently. He had known about it for 15 years. The bank had been trying to acquire the property because controlling Claire's 64 acres would give them leverage over the entire corridor. The fire had been an attempt to destroy the records. But they had missed Amos's steel box, the culvert, the county archive, and Claire. 2 days later, the foreclosure hearing resumed. This time, the courtroom was packed. The bank's attorney arrived with 3 lawyers. Voss sat alone. Claire walked through the courtroom doors carrying the steel box. The lawyers stopped talking. Voss froze. The judge entered. The bank's attorney argued that the cooperative agreement was obsolete. Claire placed Amos's original document before the judge. The judge read it. His expression changed. The attorney objected. Pike submitted the county archive. The inspector submitted photographs of the underground chamber. Mrs. Bell submitted the 1981 photograph. Then Claire placed the altered survey beside the original. The courtroom became completely silent. The judge looked toward Voss. "Mr. Voss, did your bank know about this agreement?" Voss stared at the documents. "I was told it was invalid." "By whom?" He didn't answer. The judge repeated the question. Voss looked toward the bank's regional president, then back at the judge. Finally, he said, "By him." The regional president stood. His attorney tried to stop him. But the judge had already heard enough. The bank's foreclosure petition was suspended. Then the judge asked a question nobody expected. Why did the bank insure the property for commercial development if it considered it worthless agricultural land? No one answered. The silence lasted so long Claire could hear the courthouse clock. Tick, tick, tick. Then a federal agricultural investigator entered. He had been reviewing the bank's lending records. He placed a file on the judge's bench. Inside were internal bank emails. One phrase appeared repeatedly. Acquire Mercer property before cooperative records surface. Claire closed her eyes. For months, she had thought she was losing her farm because she had failed. Now she understood something different. Her farm had been valuable precisely because someone had tried to convince her it wasn't. The judge ordered the foreclosure denied. He referred the bank's conduct for further investigation. The county revoked the private development permit, and the water cooperative was restored to the county's official records. Claire walked outside the courthouse. Neighbors gathered. Someone asked if she felt victorious. Claire shook her head. No. I just want my farm back. 3 months later, Claire returned to the eastern field. The farmhouse had been rebuilt slowly by neighbors. Mrs. Bell brought sandwiches. Pike brought the county survey. Eli painted the porch railing. And Claire brought the old Ford 8N back to work. The tractor started on the second crank. She planted winter wheat, then something else along the eastern drainage line. Pecan trees. Amos had planted the originals. The fire had killed most of them. Claire replanted them anyway. The underground system became the farm's greatest protection. Claire helped the cooperative restore the old channels and repair the valves. Farmers downstream used the system again. During the next drought, their crops survived. That water became the reason the community endured. 5 years passed. Claire's son Eli was 17. The farm was no longer drowning in debt. The pecan trees had grown tall. The old Ford 8N still ran. And the courthouse had become a place Claire rarely thought about. Daniel Voss eventually pleaded guilty to falsifying records connected to the property transaction. Years later, he sent Claire a letter admitting he had underestimated her, believed she would surrender, and was sorry. Claire kept the letter, not because she forgave him, but because she wanted to remember what happened when someone mistakes quietness for weakness. 10 years after the fire, Claire stood beneath the pecan trees with Eli. He was 22. The farm belonged to him. What? She smiled. Value isn't always above the ground. That evening, rain crossed Haskell County. The first drops struck the rebuilt metal roof. Water traveled through the rebuilt gutters, into the soil, toward roots and hidden channels Amos had protected for decades. Claire walked to the eastern field. The wheat moved in the wind. The pecan trees stood above it. And beneath her boots, water continued moving through the old concrete chamber. Quietly, patiently, exactly as it had before the fire. Exactly as it would long after she was gone. The next morning, mist covered the farm. Claire started the old Ford 8N. One crank, and the engine caught. She drove between the rows as the sun rose behind the pecan trees. Claire looked across the farm her grandfather had protected. She had not saved it with money. She had not saved it with a miracle. She had listened long enough to understand what everyone else ignored. The farm had never truly been empty. And beneath the quiet soil, the water kept moving. If your family ever had a farm, orchard, ranch, or piece of land that meant more than its price on paper, I'd love to hear about it. Maybe there was an old machine nobody wanted to throw away, a field everyone said was worthless, or a story your grandparents carried for decades. Leave it in the comments. Sometimes the quietest places are holding the biggest stories. And if you enjoyed Claire's story, stay with us, because the next one begins with something even stranger. An abandoned piece of farm equipment that everyone thought was broken, until a young farmer discovered why someone had been trying so hard to keep it hidden.